Jamie, as the head of data for AirDNA, what is the single most important thing new investors need to be looking at when they're looking to dive into short-term rental investing?
Obviously, as a data guy, I always suggest that people dig into the data before they start investing. And that's what AirDNA really tries to provide is when you're going into a market, you decided you're going to invest. And what I always want people to do is start with just getting a health of that market, getting a sense of how much is supply growing in that market. So are there more competitors or less?
Okay.
And just to give an example of like in New York right now with all the regulation,
Yeah.
there's significantly less competition. And you juxtapose that to Paris coming off the Olympics, there's so much more competition in that market. So you couldn't like put together like two wildly different markets right now. So if there's a way that you could operate in New York today with all that decreased competition moving through the regulation noise, amazing market right now. On the other side, like Paris, like you've got so much more competition and there's 50% more listings today than there were last year. That's going to be a really tough environment as a new investor coming into that type of market. So really getting a sense of what does the supply picture look like? And then conversely, on the demand side, is there the demand keeping up with that supply that's coming in? So just starting there, as an economist, me telling people, get a sense of your supply and demand. How much is supply changing and is demand keeping up?
Okay, so this is so good. I was just on a coaching call yesterday and we were looking at two markets that are alarmingly large here for the US domestically. One of our members had a property that they wanted to rent out from their mother to then rent out to short term rental guests. So essentially, an arbitrage strategy. It's in Miami. So just to like narrow down and go further and further deep into the sub market to even identify where that property is located was really interesting. And AirDNA helped us to accomplish that because there were over 30,000 listings in that market. Similarly, we're looking at Orlando. So these are markets with tens of thousands of listings, and the competition is so steep, and the properties that are top performers were beautifully laid out. But for the investment, you're going to go in paying 1.7 million and you're generating 98,000 a year, which 98,000 a year is a whole salary. Sounds great, but do that mismatch of the gross yield or the return on that, I would question that. But since it's a property her mom already had, I was like, heck yeah, let's see how much juice we can squeeze out of this particular property. So that is awesome. So you talked about supply and demand. So in that situation, we know that Miami is a destination. We know that Orlando is definitely a touristic destination. So that's great. Again, we were able to find this information inside of AirDNA. We digged in, and we're so grateful to have a tool where we're not second guessing ourselves and we're able to find that information within the platform.
Yeah. And that's a great sort of next step that I always talk people through is once you get a sense of your market, the
Mhm,
supply demand, then it's trying to get a sense of how much is that going to earn on average.
mhm,
And then go into like revenue percentiles and you can get a sense of like, okay, what is the average property earning? And then get a sense of like, all right, what does that average property have? And then going above and below that of like, all right, the top performers, what are they doing? The
mhm,
bottom performers, what are they doing?
mhm.
And then where do I think my investment is going to slot into that?
Yeah.
And you could go into Orlando and run the numbers and it's like, oh, wow, this is going to be a home run. And then you look at those properties and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do a full game room. I'm not going to do a themed house. Like, I'm going to do like maybe the average. And
Mhm,
then you got to go in and find other properties that are more average in terms of their decor,
mhm, mhm.
their amenities
Yeah.
that they offer to someone. Or if you are going to go all out and you're going to invest a lot of money, like you can see what that potential is and like what the top 10% of properties are earning. And that may be and what you want, but at least getting that range of not every 3-bedroom home is going to generate the same amount of revenue.
Mhm,
You got to understand the work that goes into what's going to be a top performer versus
mhm.
what's going to be an average performer and what's going to be an underperformer.
Okay, this is so good. And I feel like this is probably going to be one of those selfish episodes that I ask my own personal questions. I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to make sure we're getting the information for the people. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head of something that is very controversial. Some people go into AirDNA and they get a little bit excited when they see that top number. They're like, "Oh wow, I can make $107,000. Great bet." You
Yep.
have to dig a little deeper. You have to look at those top performing properties. If it's an entire movie set where the team from Disney came in and built that out and it's a $200,000, $300,000 renovation, you want to ask yourself some questions like, do I have this budget to make something like this happen? And I don't recommend it, honestly, if you're just getting started. So take a beat, simplify, and determine, what's going to be within my budget, within my return on energy as well. Those types of renovation projects, even if it's roof replacements, flooring, fix and flip, that's a lot of time capital, and you're managing contractors. So I recommend small ish renovations, 20K and under, just to get the place a little bit more modernized. So definitely take a look at that. So supply, I feel like it's very obvious. I feel like, okay, we're seeing 30,000 listing. That seems obvious. That's a large supply. So using AirDNA, Jamie, would we compare year over year supply? And as far as demand, what does that look like? How do we know? And how do we use the tool to the best of our ability to get a good insight on what demand looks like?
Yeah. So in the overview section of AirDNA, so you can go into Miami, and
Mm-hmm.
like right on that overview screen is a chart of what has supply been over the past 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the fun new innovations within an AirDNA is that that chart is now filterable, because not every listing is the same. Not every listing you're competing with. So I can get a sense like if I'm doing an entire home listing, like I don't care about private and shared rooms. So let's get rid of those and see what the chart looks like. If I'm doing a 4-bedroom house, like I really don't care what's happening in 1 and 2 bedroom properties in Miami. So let's get rid of those. And if I'm, let's say, doing a single family home, maybe I don't even care about what's in all the multifamily like skyrise apartments downtown, because what I think I'm going to be able to attract is people that want a full single family home that is maybe outside of the downtown core. So I can set those filters like houses and villas, 3+ bedrooms, and then get a sense of what does the supply look like just for those type of properties over the past few years. And that's going to give me a sense of, okay, is supply increasing? Is it decreasing? Typically, like I want to see supply increasing. Like it is a red flag for me if I go into a market and see supply down over the past year, because that tells me that people are leaving. And if people
Mm-hmm.
are leaving, that's probably because they're not making money.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, can we let that breathe for a second? For those who are sitting in the back, let's come back to me if you're multitasking. What, Jamie, say that one more time for those sitting in the back.
So if I look at a market and I see supply decreasing, that is a
Mm-hmm.
red flag,
Yeah.
because it means people are leaving. And if they're making money, more than likely they're not going to be leaving.
So good. So good. So we can equip ourselves and mitigate risk, right? By evaluating the numbers. That right there, you just gave us a whole gem. Watching that pattern, that trend, are people leaving? If people are running for the hills, something is the matter, something is wrong. Either they're not making money, regulations have changed drastically. Is that another red flag
Yeah,
for you potentially?
that's another, like if I'm looking at New York and I'm seeing dramatic declines in supply, it's like,
Mm,
all right, that's not because people weren't making money.
yeah.
Is because the city of New York implemented a new law
Mm,
that essentially outlawed short-term rentals or rentals less than 30 days.
yeah.
So that to me is another red flag of I need to dig a little bit deeper and understand the regulation. And maybe that seeing that then allows me to Google a bit
Yeah.
and like, all right, like
There
I
it is.
don't need to waste my time with this market
Yeah.
because the regulation does not allow what I'm looking to do. Conversely, if I'm maybe open to midterm rentals
Yeah.
and see that, okay, 30+ day stays are allowed in New York, we've seen a big decrease in supply. Maybe that is an opportunity for me to look at in that city.
Ooh, so good, so good. All right. So I love this where this conversation is going already. You've already given us a gem, a roadmap of identifying, okay, is this market a market worth looking into? So what are some other, I would say, pitfalls or things that we should be avoiding during our initial analysis for all the new investors out there?
Yeah. So next, like, all right, let's say I'm looking at this market, looking at Miami, and I'm seeing, let's say, 5% supply growth. So no red flags on declines. Like I'm seeing steady growth, which is to me a sign of a healthy market.
Hmm.
Then I want to get a sense of, okay, what is happening with occupancy? Because if occupancy is flat or increasing, that lets me know that this market is absorbing that supply, that there's more people coming in and staying, new guests, than there are new supply, or at least they're within the same realm. if I start to see big decreases in supply, let's say, or in occupancy, let's say supply is up 5% and occupancy is down 5%,
Hmm.
that tells me that, all right, demand is flat. There's the same number of people staying. There's just more supply, which means everyone's getting a little bit less in terms of guests. So what the sweet spot is that like supply is growing,
Mm-hmm.
but occupancy staying flat or increasing, which tells me that this market is poised for more growth. If I'm looking at a market where its supply is growing and occupancy is decreasing, it means that it might be oversaturated at this point, or at least that there's not enough demand to keep up with the supply. That could be temporary.
Okay.
So I'd want to look at that over time, but at least tells me that I probably need to look more.
Okay, so when you're looking at the occupancy, are you looking at the overall occupancy percentage for that
No,
period of time and
I'm
comparing it?
looking at I'm looking at it for that period of time
Okay.
and compared to last year.
Okay.
So on the sort of top of the page,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to give you the occupancy for the last 12 months.
Okay.
And then it's going to tell me if the occupancy for the last 12 months is greater or less
Ah,
than the year prior.
okay.
We make that very front and center of if that's positive in green, okay, you're good. If
Yeah.
it's flat, you're still probably good. If it's declining in red, that means and there's something to look in further there.
Interesting. Okay, I want to do something a little bit non-traditional. Typically for the podcast, I respect that it's an audio platform. But guys, I want you to see this. I think it's just so important. I'm a visual learner and I'm sure you are too. So as Jamie's talking, I'm on the side with one hand on my keyboard, and I just pulled up that market that I mentioned a little bit earlier in Miami. And what Jamie was just mentioning, for those who are listening on the podcast, head over to the YouTube channel because I've got a screen share real quick, just for a moment. Okay, I'm not gonna go all in, but Jamie, we might need to do a little screen share walkthrough at some point, but we'll figure that out. But I'm looking at this occupancy rate here. We're at 59%. And guys, for those of you who are long term rental investors, listen, it's a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift. We are not necessarily looking for 100% occupancy for short term rentals, especially for our larger properties. We like 65% to 75% for our larger properties for short term rentals. Our midterm rentals, we're able to achieve a 90 plus percentage. But the reason that 65 to 75% occupancy is the sweet spot for us for our 5 bedroom pluses is because we have time in between to let the property breathe a little bit. We're able to really make all of those maintenance calls and updates to make sure the product is in tippy top shape. And we make more money at that little bit of a lower occupancy rate than if we were to keep it booked all the time and start getting complaints. If it's booked at 90% occupancy, we get complaints. We just don't have the time to tighten up all the screws. So keep that in mind. I know I went on a tangent, re-listen to that part. But nevertheless, here I'm seeing an occupancy rate of 59% with a plus 2%. So you're telling me this is the year over year comparison, Jamie?
Yep. So that's looking at over the past year, that market's run at 59%. And you can see it down below there. So peaking out in March at just over
Mm-hmm.
75%. And we hit a low in September of just under 50%. So averages out to 59%. And
Mm-hmm.
that 59% for this past year, and that's from September to August, is 2% higher than it was in the same 12-month period the year
Mm-hmm.
prior. If you click on that drop down, you can change it from past 12 months to past 2 years. So you can actually see by month where it's either increase or decrease.
Nice. Nice. Okay, so this is so good. So, Jamie, when we hear the rhetoric that all the markets are saturated, Airbnb saturated, now we have a tool that we could leverage and identify whether that's true or not, because saturation is a scientific and economic term, right? It's not just it's saturated because I feel like it's saturated, or it's saturated because I see a whole lot more listings. There's a little bit more to that, Jamie.
Yeah. And it's definitely something that we want to look at over time. Because, and you can't get around the fact that the industry went through a boom in 2021 and 2022. Just about every market you look at reached peak occupancy levels during that time. And it wasn't because all of a sudden record number of people were using short-term rentals. It was because the pandemic caused 20% of the listings out there that disappear overnight. People that had second homes started using them. People that were renting out multifamily buildings in urban areas saw their demand disappear. So they converted it to long-term rentals. And as demand after COVID came back, that just pushed occupancies much higher than we'd ever seen before. So as an industry, we have been coming off of those highs, but it's not to the way where like it's alarming to me, given that we're now like roughly at pre-COVID levels. So we can go back in AirDNA and see what that market was operating at in 2018, 2019, before things got crazy with COVID. And that's my sort of comparison of, are we really weak? Or is this just what I should expect for this market? Because the highs of 2021 and 2022 were not to be expected to last forever. We were forecasting that they were going to come down. They did come down. And so now when I'm getting a sense, is 59% good for Miami-Dade? It's like, all right, let's look at how that market looks like back through time. And that can give me a sense of, all right, yeah, March, I can expect things to be high, but you know what? A lot of tourists aren't coming there in the winter or in the summer during those really hot months in Miami. So 59% is probably what I can expect in a healthy market, given that I'm going to have some high months and some low months.
Got it. Okay, this is so good. What are some other tips that we need to take into consideration when using AirDNA? And for those who may not be aware, AirDNA is my number one go-to tool for evaluating new markets for short-term rentals, for evaluating our current markets for short-term rentals as well. We want to keep a pulse on how our properties are doing on a quarterly basis compared to the market as a whole. So I find it to be the most comprehensive tool that's out there. And the reason I love it is because we have those years and years and years worth of data that we can use, that we could review. You just mentioned how to set ourselves up for success by really looking at the pre-COVID numbers, 2018, 2019, because now we're in that pre-COVID environment. What else do we need to know?
Yeah. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but when you're using our rental calculator, our rentalizer that we call it,
Okay.
a lot of times you can get really excited when you first see that number, or get really stressed when you first see that number. Or like, really? That's it? The thing to know is that what that tool is doing is it's going out and trying to find comparable properties. And the typical rentalizer estimate is going to pull 12, 15, 20, 30 properties to use in creating that estimate. As a user, as someone doing their full due diligence, it is imperative that then you go and actually review those properties that are being included in it. Because that's going to give you a sense of, all right, maybe these comps aren't relevant to the property that I'm actually investing in. And so what I typically do is I look at each comp, I'll click into them, and you can click into each property and click through the photos. So if you just scroll all the way to the bottom, that shows you each property that's being used. Or you can't click on the all, it's bad. But you can scroll to the right. There's an arrow there.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
So you can scroll through each of those and you can get and click into them, get a sense of, do you think that property is comparable or not? And then what I do is mentally or jot down, here are the figures for the ones that I think are really comparable with mine. And here are the ones that I don't.
Yeah.
And when I average those together that I think that are really comparable to mine, that gives me, in my opinion, a much better estimate than our overall figure. And we're going to have some fun updates to the tool coming up where you can actually do that on the fly, where you can add remove properties. But for now, it's you'll look through and sort of note, because and just here we see a range of $143,000 to $59,000.
Yeah.
So whether or not that $59,000 one is comparable, or whether maybe it's the $148,000 one that's a bit too high.
Yeah.
And being able to throw out the outliers and get to a much more tight range of what the properties are that are being used in this estimate, I think will really get people comfortable. And even like when we look at this map, like you see the two on the other side of the river, as opposed to all these others within the same neighborhood. This is where, like when Rentalizer and the tools going at it, it's just drawing circles and looking at it closer. To me, I would say, you know what, that $94,000 and $124,000 on the other, like given that I've got so many in the exact same neighborhood, let me stick with those and let me get rid of those two other properties, because even though they might be comparable, like I have all these other great comps in the same neighborhood that I should probably be using.
So you're able to then narrow your focus. And I think that's where the overwhelm comes in. You go into a market like Central Dade, Miami, or Orlando, and then there's tens of thousands. But if we could whittle it down, what's a good number for you? I tell my members, I like to see about 20 listings to start. And then we have our top tier that we know, okay, there's no way we're going to achieve that because there's a lagoon sized pool, lazy river. And then so we know that's the ceiling. That's the ceiling for us. And then the worst property ever. The photos, it looks like grandma threw it together. No offense, grandma, I love you to pieces. But right? So we know that we can definitely, there's no way we're gonna do worse than this. So in between, it's the in between. But I find there's some clusters sometimes, Jamie. So there's like a batch that's in the 78, 77,000, and then a batch that's in the low 50s. So at that
Mhm.
point, it's a lot of deductive reasoning for my members. I call it our PACU method. Okay, if it's in a destination, touristic destination, what's the proximity to the things, the stuff? So suburban, how close it is to the good shops, and beach, how close it is to the water. So those are some things that you can say, okay, this property is better than mine. Mine is like a give or take. We go back and forth. And that's the only way that I know to do that for those last properties that are standing. Maybe there's 8 of them. And I just ping pong back and forth and determine, am I superior or am I inferior to that property? And just being radically honest with myself. Is that what you would recommend? Give me some pointers. How do I improve
Yeah.
that process a little bit?
No, 100%. I love it because I do the exact same thing. I
Okay.
start with 20 to 30 properties
Hmm.
that are in proximity, same
Yep.
bedroom baths, like
Yeah.
accommodate. I'll go ahead and filter out some that have or don't have pools, like
Yep.
depending on what my property is going to
Yeah.
have, or a hot tub. And then it's the real work, right? Of evaluating each comp. And then ideally, for me, it's getting to a really strong set of 6 to 10
Yeah.
properties. Then if I can operate at the same level as these properties,
Hmm.
this is what I'm going to
Yeah.
earn. And that gives me the confidence in making an investment. But like you said, like it takes the work. So I'm spending at minimum like 30 minutes to an hour evaluating
Yeah.
comps for each property that I'm looking to invest
Yeah.
in. When I'm doing that next level
Yeah.
dive, like maybe I'll use the rentalizer number as my initial screen
Yes.
of, does this yield number make sense for me to dig deeper?
Hmm.
And then when I'm digging deeper, that's when I'm evaluating each individual comp to get a sense of, does this represent and similar to the investment that I'm looking to make.
Love that. Okay, so let's go back to the different, I would say, products within AirDNA. Of course, there's the rentalizer. I say AirDNA is freemium because there is some aspect of it that's free. You can look at the rentalizer. That information for me, I like to see what the occupancy rate is looking like for a market. If I get a 50% or more occupancy rate, already that's a thumbs up for me. It's like, okay, people are coming to this market. If it's like in the 20 or 30%, it's like, oh, I'm not interested. I get nervous, right? Because I'm not doing a big rural glamping situation, right? Where you might see that, number one. Number two, I take a look at the revenue potential high level. I know it averages all of those properties that are there, but I'm still going to need to do some digging. But what I do with that number, say the revenue for a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 6 guests, and you want to make sure you've updated those data points, is 70,000, and I go into the market, the purchase price for a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom property ranges from 1.8 million to 2.5 million. That math isn't mathing for me, right? So I go to Zillow. I'll have my rentalizer and I'll have Zillow side by side and say, okay, for this price point, what is the purchase price of properties available? And so that's not going to make sense for me. And I did that analysis. I found an area in Durham. No, was it Raleigh? So it was 5 bedrooms in Raleigh, a 74% occupancy rate. Revenue potential was like $75,000 for that particular zip code, that address. Like at that, I found another property a while back. It was like 999,000 to 2.5 million. I was like, okay, now I'm looking more around the $500,000 range. What can I find for that? So that immediately informs you a yay or nay. Do I want to dive deeper? But the deep dive has to happen before we open our wallets, right, Jamie?
Yeah. And again, a pro tip, you now don't have to go to Zillow for that. So with AirDNA now pulling in all the for sale properties on Zillow or homes.com or Redfin, you can actually see all those. Let's say you're looking in that submarket, you can go to the for sale properties, and instead of having to run each property one by one through the for sale section, So if you just click back, it should take you to whatever market you were in, or keep going. So now we're in Central Dade. You see it has the 635 for sale properties listed. So now you can see each home that's available for sale and then what our estimated revenue is for that property. So you're getting essentially us running a rentalizer in every property available for sale. And we're going to tell you in one view what those figures are.
Okay. So I have not used it like this yet. So for those of you who are listening, guys, I am sharing screens again. This is so easy. So for instance, this one is a 3-2. For sale is 625, and the revenue potential is 59,300. I've got the number of days on the market. This is fantastic. 69% occupancy rate. I think like something just popped in my brain. And it's sad because I knew this was here, Jamie, but I didn't make the connection.
Yeah. And a lot of people haven't made the connection yet. And the one additional thing that we're going to have in the next few weeks is we'll have the gross yield listed on it. So making that calculation for you of what is the revenue divided by the for sale property,
I just fell
and
out
then
of my
allow
seat,
you
y'all.
and then allow you to sort. We're seeing what people are doing manually and then trying to make it easier for you to find those good investments.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so good. So good, Jamie. One thing that you guys made easier for me as well was the table view that I can then export. Chef's kiss, my favorite thing. My favorite thing. I have so many spreadsheets where I can make my little notations as well. So this is so good. This has been amazing. So all this to say, for those who are just listening in and who are like, okay, you guys went deep on the data, but Jamie, is Airbnb even viable still? Everyone's talking about Airbnb bust. Is Airbnb dead? Talk to people. Give us your honest, unadulterated thoughts on how the future for Airbnb looks as far as short-term rental investing, mid-term rental investing. Tell us.
Yeah. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is. Just made my own investment, closed on a house about 3 months that I'm going to run as a short-term rental. But, and what I tell people is you've got to get comfortable that people are going to continue to choose short-term rentals over other forms of lodging and are going to continue to be traveling. So people will travel if they have a job and have income. I do not believe that we're going to be going into a recession over the next 12 to 24 months, no matter who is in the White House come January. I think that people for certain types of trips will continue to prefer short-term rentals over hotels. And we see that in the data. We see short-term rental penetration in terms of overall lodging. So the number of stays happening in short-term rentals relative to hotels continue to grow, which tells me that we're still riding these tail waves of Airbnb adoption in the broader marketplace. And that makes me feel comfortable. Yeah, we might see increases and decreases in occupancy over the next 1 to 2 years. But I don't know about you, Rachel, but I'm not making this investment for the next 1 to 2 years. I'm making this investment for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm looking for areas where I expect to see longer term growth in the metro areas that sort of support those destinations. So part of why I bought a house in North Georgia was I expect the continued growth of the Atlanta metro area to continue to outpace other comparable metros. So I want to look at where are the areas that people are moving to, and then for those areas, where do they take vacations? Because that's where I'm going to find my outsized sort of growth compared to my competitors. And I'm thinking competitors now like other investors.
Yeah.
So like, where can I make the best choice and where they're not going to make the best choice? So I'm thinking about it in that way. And so I'm betting on the long-term health of travel and of short-term rentals taking a bigger piece of that pie. And I think that is absolutely going to continue.
Okay, this is a great conversation. And I know there's so much I want to cover. I want to cover regulations and all the things, but I want to keep it tight for the people. So I'm going to go in a different direction instead. Now, we were in the green room, and a little birdie told me that although you are the head of data, we have a reluctant spouse in the room. And a lot of our members encounter this. We have the visionary, the one spouse was like, oh, I could see this vision of this short-term rental working out for us. And then we have the conservative spouses like, hey, we can't necessarily afford to take a risk on this. That was my husband. kicking and screaming. I dragged him across the finish line to launch our first rental, and now he's the head of operations for our entire portfolio because it really was impactful to our lives. It's changed the game for us. So, Jamie, let us know a little bit about your experience regarding reluctant spouse, as well as what this project is going to look like. Because I would love the audience to tap in with you and to listen in and experience you launching this rental that you just shared with us.
So what I was mentioning is we're actually doing a whole series at AirDNA on it because I had started along on it, on the process, and told our marketing team, and they're like, "We want to capture this on video." So we just launched the first episode as of the beginning of September, and it's going to be a whole 8 episode series on their they call it Jamie's Lane change from short-term rental expert to rental rookie.
Oh,
So it was
love that.
my first like full-time investment. So what I had going for me is my wife and I were hosting on Airbnb back in 2014, 2015, 16. We were actually hosting in a private room in our house. So we loved that interaction with guests. She loved it. She really took it on while we were doing it, of doing guest communications, doing and all the things, getting the house ready. So she loved that aspect. The thing that I had to get her over the sort of line on was that it wasn't too much of a risk
Yeah.
for our personal finances. And what was the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
So that's where using the data and
Mm.
going back to the beginning of the conversation of being able to show her this is who we're competing with,
Mhm.
this is how much they're earning. And some of these properties, like it's the worst photos.
Yeah.
It's furniture that hasn't been updated in 40
I
years.
love
Like,
those market. Yes.
and then showing her like what these people are earning, and it's like, oh wow, we're gonna
We
crush
could
them.
kill it. Yes.
And then I'm outlining the full sort of investment model. All right, here's what we're going to buy it
Mhm.
for. Here's what I think we're going to
Yeah.
earn, and go. I'm pretty conservative in terms of what we're going to
Yeah.
earn. Here's what it's going to cost us to operate it. So all the expenses associated with running that property. And then here's what's left over. This is found money for us as long as we're able to make this initial investment. And here's what that money's coming out of. And then helping get comfortable. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. And then here's I would say the best case scenario, or maybe my expected scenario of here's what happens if we hit it out of the park. Here's what happens if we run like where I think it's going to run in the top tier of our market. And then like of then her seeing that range and okay, like this could actually be a real big benefit,
Yeah.
and us growing sort of appreciation over time, us having that house to potentially use when it's not booked. Yeah, all those sort of things of helping make the case. And then once she said, okay, I could see that happening, moving as quick as humanly possible to make it happen before she changed her mind again.
The numbers do not lie, folks. Data is the key. Data is the key. That is, I'll call it the husband repellent, right? It helps the husbands to come on board. It helps the spouses, the partners, the wives to come on board because now we are no longer investing from an emotional standpoint. Like, I feel like this might work, or I think this might work, and we're opening our wallets and risking it all. We have the data to back us up. And I love what you said that she has that hospitality inside of her that she's done it already. So she was able to connect the dot. And one thing that's surprising inside of my community is all of my medical professionals, when they launched, they didn't realize how much patient care is in alignment with guest care. It's similar. You're always wanting to make sure, oh, I hope they're okay. I hope they're having a good time. It translates beautifully. So,
Mhm.
absolutely love, love, love this. And we're going to stay plugged in with you. I do have a few minutes. So, hopefully, we can cover this in just a few minutes that we have. So, Jamie, could you give us a high level overview? What are the one or two top things we need to consider with regulations? Is regulations bad? Do we just avoid it like the plague? Any opinions?
In general, I love
Me too.
regulation.
Yeah.
I love operating in a market where I know the rules of the road. That said, there are some markets that have gone way overboard in terms of regulation. And that's something that we have to be very vigilant in monitoring for. And then when we see it coming through the political pipeline, of being vocal in our opposition, if you're either thinking about investing in that market or already operating in that market.
Yeah.
Because you are, as an investor, you're a constituent in that market,
Yeah.
you're paying taxes. And that's something that, and local officials, if they put out these ideas and no one opposes them, then, and they see smooth sailing. If they put out the ideas and then they see massive opposition, that they can really change course. And we've seen that in so many cities around the country. Atlanta was a great
Yeah.
example of new legislation coming in and even getting enacted, and then there being so much pushback from local hosts, local operators, that they essentially said, you know what, we're not going to force this. We're going to go back to the drawing board. So the biggest thing is getting
Yeah.
involved, of staying on top of what's happening. But I am a big fan of regulation, of making sure that, and if there's a need to get a permit, that you can get a permit, that you can let the city know that you've got a business operating in their jurisdiction, and then have a way to and stay informed to know that they're earning taxes, they're earning revenues off of your business,
Yeah.
and that it's actually a big benefit for so many local areas around the country.
Love that. Love that. All right. So now we transition to our rapid fire segment. It's going to be super quick. Jamie, can you share a moment where you felt completely burnt out and how you overcame it?
Prior to joining AirDNA, I was in the hotel industry,
Mm.
and my job in 2020 was forecasting hotel demand. And I can tell you, with the start of the pandemic, I felt entirely overwhelmed. I'm sure with a bunch of healthcare providers, and not nearly to the extent that many of your listeners were seeing it, but for me, it was, I needed a change. I didn't want to be talking about a recovery for the next 10 years. I saw the situation that I don't want to be in, and I made a change. And I actually made a full career move out of the hotel industry into short-term rentals.
Love that. All right. So don't be afraid of change, guys. What about a book? What is a book or resource that completely changed your perspective on work or on life as a whole?
This is maybe an obscure one for this audience, but it was called A Signal and a Noise by Nate Silver. So Nate Silver was actually who did 538, but he wrote a whole book on risk and analyzing data. And it really changed the way I thought about data, and it put some concepts that I had internalized into words. And you know, that time when you like read something, you're like, yes, that's the concept I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Like it really solidified a lot of thinking for me.
Oh, good one. All right. We'll link it. I've never heard of it. So thank you for sharing. What is the craziest real estate story that you have experienced or you've heard?
Yeah. So when I bought the house I'm in now, it was in 2008. This house was in foreclosure, bank owned, and it had been broken into, and someone had stolen all the copper pipes out of it, had no plumbing, no heating and air. And 22-year-old Jamie was going to live in the house and renovate it and get it back going. The bank asked if it was livable. I thought that meant like, could I live in it? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to camp in my house and use the bathroom down the street. And so I said yes. I didn't know that that was a technical term of, did it have running water? Lived in the house for 3 months, essentially without plumbing, getting the house up and running. And it was a crazy experience in the sort of depth of the housing crisis to buy this house, renovate it, and get it up and running. And have been living this home now for 16 years.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I love that so much. My kids have banned me from doing any more, I call them live-in flips. So, Jamie, I knew there's so much connection. You being in the Atlanta market, us being data nerds, loving our spreadsheets and numbers, but I didn't know you did a live and flip. So that brings us closer, my friend. I love that. Guys, that wraps up our episode for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in for the Luxury Rental Doctor Show. Jamie, it was such a pleasure having you. All of the invaluable insights. And guys, we have barely scratched the surface. Comment in the chat below, DM me, reach out. We love using AirDNA. I've got a lot of data that I extract from there. I share with you some of my favorite cities using 75 gems in order to get the ball rolling, get you out of analysis paralysis. So thank you guys for joining us. Remember, investing in luxury short and midterm rentals is not just about the income, guys. It's about creating that time freedom, that location freedom, creating a life that you do not need a vacation from. Until next time, my friends, Dr. Rachel signing out. Bye bye for now.